So recently, I've been talking to a few people, and there's some people in the insight Theravada tradition, right? And I think maybe I wanted to ask you this question because you're so you live in all these different worlds. You're so knowledgeable of all these different paths, and so some of these Theravada sort of insight practitioners who also have received a lot of Dzogchen instructions
Yeah.
from great masters. And so then the question is arising for some of them that and they're very serious meditators, and so they are experiencing what in Theravada or in the insight tradition would be called cessation, moments of cessation. And and in this tradition you would be considered like a stream enterer, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is very high stuff, of course, but the question is, so then there's some equating going on of this cessation with rigpa, right?
Mhm.
Because they're saying because we got to this rigpa, we started talking about rigpa, which is on unconditioned, right? And so they describe cessation as unconditioned, right? But they've had these, uh, and they also describe it as not lights out. So
What?
then, not lights out, like there's some sort of luminosity there, not like it's not like blank nothingness,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, not lights
Sure.
out. And so the
Nothing
way they
wrong.
describe this cessation is that um yeah, it's an unconditioned state, but it's not lights out. And so they're saying they're sort of equating this with rigpa. And then I'm wondering what you think and how you would know. Like partly I would be thinking, oh, isn't this just maybe this is just the fourth mindfulness. Of course, that's not unconditioned. So there's a category error here or something going on, but maybe it is. And I was just wondering, what's your initial impression of something when you hear something like that?
Okay. I'm gonna answer from left field where you wouldn't expect it. One of my lamas is one of the great lamas of contemporary Bhutan, Gangten Tugur Rinpoche. He's regarded as the body emanation of Bema Lingpa, kind of the patron saint of Bhutan, one of the great Dertun of Bhutan. So I received teaching from him. I've translated for him. We invited him to Santa Barbara. And when he was teaching in Santa Barbara with a very fine interpreter, not me, he made this comment that for those of us who are following Dzogchen, the pinnacle, the ninth yana, that supersedes all the preceding, even stage regeneration, Mahayoga, stage of completion, Anu Yoga. He said, for those of us following Dzogchen, it's very easy to think ours is the supreme vehicle. Way down at the bottom of the stack, the ground floor, that's the Shravakayana. Well, that's where the Pali Canon is. The Shravakayana is not equivalent to Theravada. That's one of 18 interpretations of the Pali Canon, but it's definitely Shravakayana. It's not Pratyeka Buddha. It's certainly not Bodhisattva. And so it's very easy to feel superior. Isn't it wonderful that we Dzogchenpas are so exalted, so superior to everybody else, including those Galupas, are stuck in stage of generation completion? Isn't it wonderful to be so superior? Well, it's one of the root mental afflictions, Rangitawa Choktu Zimba, grasping one's own view as being supreme. So you turn Dzogchen into a root illusion. Whoops, And so he said, I don't agree with that. Now, he's a classic Dzogchen master, and he's knowledgeable. But he said, I don't agree with that we have the supreme vehicle. Because for those following the Shravakayana, there's no reference to Theravada, just Shravakayana, which, is generic. It encompasses all the 18 schools that interpret the Pali Canon. For those for whom this is the best and the most effective and the deepest and transformative of all the teachings of the Buddha, Shravakayana, the four applications of mindfulness, the four immeasurables, mindfulness of breathing, for those people for whom say, I can't imagine anything better than this. Mindfulness of breathing, 16 phases take you all the way to arhatship, four immeasurables, what's more sublime than that? And the four applications of mindfulness, what could possibly be better than that? I'm home, I'm a happy camper. This is supreme. And Gandhi Dhukaramachi says, you're right. For you, that is the supreme vehicle. It's the one that's going to take you the farthest, that fits best. It's the deepest, most transformative, most efficacious. Be content, you are following your Dzogchen.
Mm.
And the ninth yana would not be as helpful for you. So there's no point in saying something is the highest vehicle when it's not the highest vehicle for everybody. If it were the highest vehicle for everybody, then the Buddha would never have taught the lower 8, as if I'm just holding the best for my elite chosen few. So I really resonated with that. He said, rather than thinking it's hierarchical, thinking of this as like a pie with 9 slices. And for some, the Bodhisattva yana, the Sutra yana, like Shantideva and so forth, that's a supreme yana. And for others, state regeneration or Kriya Yoga, Charya Yoga, Yoga Tantra, and so forth, that's the supreme. This is why we have such a rich diversity. Because for individuals, Kangla Kandul, each one according to their needs, these teachings are the best to subdue their mind and transform them. That made me feel very relaxed. And I've just embraced that ever since then. Now I'll answer your question, but I think it's very important. Anybody, if one's Theravada and thinking, well, we have the only authentic Buddhism, and those Hindus, let alone those Christians and the Jews and the Muslims, ours is so much better, because we have the only authentic Dharma. That's just grasping one's own view as supreme. And His Holiness Dalai Lama said, Buddhism is not the best vehicle for everybody. For some people, it's Christianity. For some people, it's the Jaina tradition, and so forth and so on. That's their Dzogchen. And to say that one inherently existent supreme vehicle is just that, inherently the best, it's just one more expression of delusion. Now come back to your question. Whether these people are actually realizing the Gokpe Nyomchuk, it's the samapati of Nirodha, okay?
No.
There's no way you can experience that. This is just classic. Speak with a man you know very well who is really one of our finest Western scholars, Bhikkhu Bodhi, and ask him, is it possible even to become a stream enterer, let alone achieve the absorption in Nirodha without having achieved the first jhana? He'll tell you. It's not possible. You can't become a stream enterer unless you've achieved the union of shamatha and vipassana. Because if you do not achieve shamatha, then you still have the 5 obscurations fully active. And the Buddha himself said, a person who has not subdued the 5 obscurations is like a person who's in debt, they never pay off. A person who is sick, really terribly sick. A person who's in bondage, handcuffs, leg irons. A person who's also enslaved. You add all these together, it's a pretty sad picture. And who is lost in a desert track. You're out in the middle of the Gobi and you don't know where you are or where to go, while you're in debt and sick, in handcuffs and leg irons and enslaved, and also you're in the middle of nowhere and have no idea where you're going. That's what it's like to have an ordinary mind that's oppressed by the 5 obscurations. Such a person cannot possibly, carrying all of that baggage, reach the state of an Arya. Stream entry. It's ridiculous. This means you can be a cripple, mentally a cripple with all these 5 obscurations, and also be an Arya. That actually doesn't make any sense. This is Bhikkhu Bodhi with his extraordinary erudition and open mind. So anybody who says, I've achieved the samapati of Nirodha without having simply achieved shamatha is delusional. There's a lot of talk about, achieving insight with, dry insight without shamatha, but it's a misinterpretation of Buddha-ghosts. I'm sorry to say, but it's just a misinterpretation and illusion of knowledge, which is widely propagated. But the Buddha was so clear that jhana, at least the first jhana, or at least coming back to later interpretations, access to the first jhana, which we find in the Theravada tradition and in the whole Indian Sanskrit tradition, at least that where the 5 obscurations are really subdued, then you have a mind, in Tibetan, lesuruma, that is really fit for action. The Buddha himself commented on this in a short sutta called The Cook, and I'll just go to the core of it. He said, you cannot fully realize the benefits of the 4 applications of mindfulness, satipatthana, without having identified the sign of the mind, chitta nimitta. And then you look into the sub-commentaries, and it's perfectly clear. The sign of the mind, the identification, the knowing, the mastery of which is indispensable for vipassana to be fully effective, is the bhavanga. If you've not achieved shamatha, you can have many insights, but they will not be radically transformative, as can be brought about only with the union of shamatha vipassana. So anybody that says, I've achieved nirodha, maybe it's rigpa, but they haven't even achieved shamatha yet, well, that's an illusion of knowledge.
What if they have achieved shamatha?
If they have achieved shamatha and vipassana, they've realized the 3 marks of existence, that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, all tainted phenomena are unsatisfying, and all phenomena are empty and devoid of self, if they realize that, then could they experience the absorption into cessation? Definitely yes, for sure. But is that rigpa?
Yes, that's the
There's no
question.
reference anywhere in the Pali Canon to Buddha nature, to primordial consciousness, to any dimension of consciousness that is unconditioned. There's no reference at all. Zero. There's one sutra that intimates it, but it's pretty much not interpreted as being anything like Buddha nature or primordial consciousness. So to say that this experience that is classic and very, very deep, Pali Canon, Shravakayana, Theravada realization, of authentic realization of this cessation, well, it is very deep. But there's nothing in their own context that suggests this is unborn, unconditioned. There's no reference to Buddha nature in the whole of the Pali Canon. Zero. Pali Canon comes in the third turning wheel of Dharma of the Mahayana Sutras, and that Buddha nature is rigpa, that is primordial consciousness. And then if we go to, well, who are the real authorities that can really speak with, who really know what they're talking about when it comes to pristine awareness? Well, these are the great masters going back to Padmasambhava and Vimalamitra and Vairochana, and on right through history to Longchenpa, and on into the 20th century, Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche, Düjen Rinpoche, Chade Rinpoche, and so forth. Some of whom, like Düjen Rinpoche, are consummate scholars, world class, and have profound direct realization of rigpa. So again, whatever I think really, friend to friend, whatever Alan Wallace thinks just doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what I think. But it does matter what Düjen Rinpoche, Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche, Padmasambhava, Longchenpa say. And they all say, in a unison, that the realization of the Shravakayana is not even remotely the same as a direct realization of, in the stage of completion, the indwelling mind of clear light. It's not the same as Tsongkhapa. Ask Sakya Pandita, ask any of the New Translation masters, none of them will say, yeah, it's all one after all. Wishy-washy, wishy-washy. None of them will say that. And among the great masters, going back to, Sri Singha and Maharishi Mitra and so forth, none of them say that what the pinnacle of insight in the Shravakayana, well, it's all the same as Rigpa. No, and so it's just not. And it doesn't matter what I think, and it doesn't matter what these people think. If you want to know about quantum mechanics, ask Niels Bohr, ask Werner Heisenberg, ask John Wheeler. You don't ask the grocer on the corner. Go to the great masters, and they'll tell you the most insightful conclusions from quantum mechanics. John Wheeler is absolutely astonishing, but you don't ask your physics teacher in high school, And so if you want to know what's a relationship, go to a person like Düjen Rinpoche, who is completely familiar with all the 9 yanas and knows the limitations. Why is the Pratyeka Buddha? Why is that superior to Shravaka? Why is the Bodhisattva superior to? Why is, Kriya Tantra Charya? Why are each one superior, transcending, going beyond? Why is stage of completion beyond the stage of generation? And why is Ati Yoga? Does that transcend and encompass the insides of stage of generation completion? Ask these people, but don't ask people who are not thoroughly trained in and have profound realization of Dzogchen from a lineage master. You're asking the wrong people. So they can think whatever they like, but simply equate these two. I say, on what basis? Your own experience? Really?
Thank you so much. This is really, really helpful. We live in such interesting times where all these traditions are now, in conversation in a way they haven't been before. So to have these sort of clarifications are really important. So thank you so much. Beautiful.
Here I'll add one point that's a very, very important point. Am I passing judgment on all the great masters of the Theravada tradition, going back to Buddhaghosa and before, and saying, well, you people have inferior realization to that of great Vajrayana masters, Tsongkhapa and so forth and so on? I'm not saying that. That would be pompous. It would be an illusion of knowledge. I don't know that. Is it possible? This is an enormously important point, Daniel. Is it possible that a person could be a very mature, very ripe, suitable vessel who's been trained his or her whole life in Thailand, in Burma, Sri Lanka, or Myanmar, trained in the traditional practices, is it possible that that person following that tradition could go so deep that they would actually could cut through the conditioned mind and realize rigpa? Is that possible? The answer is yes.
Okay.
Because if we can have cases, which we have throughout the history of Buddhism, where somebody hits another person, Tilopa hits Naropa with a fish, whack, or with his sandal, whack, and then suddenly he realizes rigpa. Well, if it's possible to realize rigpa by getting hit with a sandal, then I want to take off my Birkenstocks when I'm ready. I want to go smack all over the place, you know. Maybe it'll work with you. Sit there, Tara, stand up straight, whack. Oh, it didn't work. Okay, I'll try the next person. I just go around whacking people.
Yeah.
That's a method for realizing, well, it was for him, but not for most people, because they just get a bruised face, right? So is it conceivable that people outside of the Buddhist tradition, great yogis, having spontaneous realization that people who are not Buddhist, might they, by their past karma, by blessings of their own guru, whether it's Jesus or whether it's Padmasambhava, is it possible for people outside the Buddhist tradition to have a spontaneous realization of rigpa? I certainly can't say no. And I also certainly can't say, oh yes, Meister Eckhart, he knows, or Nicholas of, I can't say that either. Yeah. But for me to say, oh no, you have to be a Buddhist. Well, that's not true. And you know why that's empirically, unequivocally, indisputably not true? Bumbos are not taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Follows the Buddhist tradition. They don't. They have their own lineage, and it doesn't go back to Buddha Shakyamuni. Over the last 1,000 years, have there been Burn masters who have not only realized rigpa, but achieved rainbow body? The answer is indisputable. Anybody who's lived in Tibet, you know that it's not only Nyingmapas who achieve rainbow body, some of the Bumbos have achieved rainbow body as well. But they're not Buddhist. Now, they're following very similar practices, to be sure. But these practices, as Judam Rinpoche himself comments, practices can arise spontaneously. And sometimes they'll arise, you can achieve shamatha, for example, in a linear fashion. And sometimes no go, no go, no go. And then suddenly, woof, you know, you cross a threshold, and then there's a substrate consciousness, and your coarse mind is dissolved into subtle mind. So it can happen spontaneously. Therefore, could there be very pure Theravada practitioners over the whole history of Theravada tradition, or following their own tradition, by way of that, unveiling the indwelling mind of clear light? Certainly possible. Certainly possible. Certainly not for me to say no.
Thank you so much. Very nicely said.